You may well have heard that there has been a row between David Mellor and the driver of a black cab in London. The former Conservative cabinet minister was recorded verbally abusing the cabbie during a disagreement over the quickest route home after he'd been at Buckingham Palace where his partner was receiving a CBE. The driver on the receiving end of Mellor's sharp tongue then gave his story to the Sun newspaper, and two of our producers have voiced up the exchange so you can get a flavour.
I know who I'm talking to. You're David Mellor, so what?
I don't want a lot of back chat, just drive me there. And don't think even with the limited supervision that you guys have today, I can't take a lot of fuss from you. Don't you talk to me like this. I'm a Queen's Counsel for all these years, and don't ruin our day, just drive a sensible way. I don't want to know how much you know about London, because you don't know as much about London as I do. Take me the way I want to go, okay? Because that's part of what you're supposed to do.
I don't have to get talked to like that.
I'd think carefully if I were you.
You don't intimidate me.
I'm not trying to intimidate you.
You are.
I'm just sick of having to be in the same cab as you.
Listen, you got in here, then you start telling me which way to go. And I said, look, it's Friday night, it's 10 to 6. You may have lived in London 40 years or wherever long, but I've been driving a cab for 10 years.
You've been driving a cab for 10 years. I've been in the cabinet. I'm an award-winning broadcaster. I'm a Queen's Counsel. You think that your experience is anything compared to mine? Just shut up, for Christ's sake. Drive whichever way you want to go and keep a civil tongue in your head. And don't give me a lot of
You want to calm down?
Of course you could apologise. I don't suppose a guy like you does apologise, do you? Because you think you're a big having driven a cab for 10 years. You don't need to worry about someone who's been in the cabinet, who's an award-winning broadcaster, who's a Queen's Counsel. Treat me like ruin my wife's day. She's been to the palace and been awarded a major award. You our day. Does that give you pleasure?
To be honest with you, Mr. Mellor,
I don't want to hear about you being honest. And if you think you're going to be sarky with me, get a better education.
Oh dear. Now, many have called the ex-politician a snob. Others have questioned why the cabbie recorded the row in the first place. And they're asking what happened before the tape started rolling. The BBC's Andrew Bomford went onto the streets of London to find out what black cab drivers made of the row, and their response may actually surprise you.
I picked him up a good 20 years ago, probably.
Most cab drivers, it seems, have picked up David Mellor at one time or another.
He was all right, you know, he had his little dog with him.
We're in a taxi heading to a cabbie's cafe near Paddington Station. And Carl here is happy to admit that cab drivers are not always right.
If you pick someone up and they're going from A to B and they live in town and they're doing it all the time, they might know better than what you do because you're doing, say, 20 jobs a day. Your brain's a computer at the end of the day. Sometimes that's going to sort of break down a little bit, you know.
So cabbies are fallible then?
I think so.
Outside the cafe, a few drivers are waiting for fares. There's one subject they're talking about.
David Mellor, I picked him up once in Davies Street. I can't remember where he went, but he did tell me where to go. And I took his advice and he showed me the way.
Would you have chosen a different route?
No, because the customer is always right. No arguments.
See ya. Yeah, Peter Stevens, taxi driver, 34 years, man and boy. I've picked him up a few times, yeah. He's everybody's picked him up a few times. He can be a bit arrogant, but in his defence, I picked him up on Sunday, and he was a gentleman.
What, just this last Sunday?
Sunday. He actually told me which way he wanted to go, and I was quite happy with it. He sent me, he was going to Charing Cross, he went, can you go down the embankment, come up Savoy Hill? And I went, fine, not a problem, bish bash bosh. He does it all the time, he always says which way he wants to go. And some cab drivers don't like it, but depends how he speaks to you. He can be very abrupt.
In the cafe, cab drivers Andy and Paul are musing about awkward customers.
It's something that happens every day, and why get involved in having an argument? Just smooth things over. It's all part of a day's work and go back to work. Don't make such a big thing out of it.
I've had him in the cab twice, David Mellor. It's good as gold, apart from supporting Chelsea.
We don't know what went on immediately before it, so it's difficult to judge.
No, I picked up David Mellor and he was fine with me, and I wouldn't, if he said anything to me, I wouldn't tell anybody about it because it's private.
You just said before, the back of the cab is like a confessional.
We don't talk about what people say to us. When we find out who that guy is, he's going to be ostracised.
The one that did the recording?
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that a no-no?
You never told people what the passengers said.
So who was right? Should David Mellor have reacted in this way? Was the cabbie right to record the conversation? conversation without telling him and then give it to the Sun. Harry Mount joins us, journalist and author who writes for The Spectator, as does Steve McNamara, General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association. So as a spokesperson for taxi drivers, Steve, what are the rights and wrongs of recording the conversation?
I don't think there's any legal precedent set for it. I mean, most cab drivers wouldn't do it. There's no facilities to record conversations. Obviously, this driver's done it on his mobile phone. Would I have recorded it? No, I wouldn't. Most of my members that I've spoken to yesterday, and I spoke to lots, they wouldn't have recorded it either. And I think it's fair to say that the general consensus of cab drivers is pretty much what you heard in that cafe yesterday.
Harry, whose side are you on in this case?
Definitely on the cabbie side. I thought David Miller behaved utterly disgustingly, but it's a great story because the mask slips and you hear exactly what he's like.
Because he has this great line, you've been driving a cab for 10 years, I've been in the cabinet.
There's a nice line, good journalistic line, but so pompous, and going through his list of achievements, calling himself a Queen's Counsel, referring to his time in government when, of course, he had to resign through disgrace. Absolute gold dust.
But then maybe he was somehow exasperated by the driver or the driving. Is that any defence?
I don't think so. And as one of the cabbies said, we don't know what happened before, but actually, whatever happened before, what he said was completely beyond the pale. And what we hear the cabbie saying is perfectly reasonable throughout.
Steve?
I've had to pick David Miller up in my cab.
Oh, right, so you can tell us.
Sounds like most cab drivers have. I found him very pleasant. I didn't find him pompous or rude at all. I would strongly suspect that on the way back from the palace, at the time of day of the journey, they hadn't come straight from the palace. I would think that he's had a glass of Chablis or claret somewhere, and I think that's probably got a lot to do with it.
But the cab driver was apparently driving him the wrong way, or so David Miller said. Now, to what extent does the customer have the right to say, can you go a different way?
I mean, as we said, we don't know what was said beforehand, but as you heard most of those cab drivers say, the customer can't be wrong. If the customer wants to go a certain way, he'll be right, even though he is wrong. And then when you sit in the traffic, there's an awkward silence where the customer then says after a period of time, it's not normally like this. And that's the way to do it. Let them be proved wrong. If they want to go a certain way, go that way.
Is it correct to say that cabbies mind when customers say they want to go a certain way?
No, the vast majority of cab drivers, as you heard on there, are happy to go whatever way the passenger wants. Any journey is always a matter of choice and preference, and if a customer wants to go a certain way, we'll go that way.
We've had this thing about snobs in the news, Harry, where Mellor is now accused of being a snob. Emily Thornberry accused of being a snob because she tweeted a picture of that house in Rochester with the flags on. Is this the worst thing to be now?
No, of course there are lots and lots worse things to do. You know, serial killers, murderers, rapists, the rest of it, a bit further down the spectrum. But I do think we are obsessed with class in this country, and we're incredibly sensitive to every single manifestation of it. And those extreme versions, like Emily Thornberry and David Miller did, are not only disgusting, but they're deeply gripping because we're so interested in the subject.
And in terms of black cabs, maybe this is a London thing, that the driver of black cab and the black cabs themselves, do you think some people say they drive to the lights? In other words, they will the lights to go red so they can stop and you can charge you more. I don't know if that's true or not.
Well, I think I'm on the show because about 6 months ago I wrote an article saying I've given up taking black cabs because the majority of them are great, but I've had too many which have slowed down to get red lights, that have gone slow in the middle of the night. And the day I gave up was early this year when I was late at night on a Friday going from Bloomsbury to Camden, straight run. I've lived there 20 years, and the driver tried to take me through Camden Market, the only place at that time of night which would be packed with traffic. I told him to go the other way, very politely, not David Miller style. He did change his route, but very grumpily didn't say a word. And in those situations, he should have said, I'm extremely sorry, because he was trying to pull a fast one.
Yeah, so you think he was trying to change the route to get more money?
Absolutely, definitely.
Steve, is that right? Is that what drivers do?
Absolute tosh. Like most of the stuff that Harry wrote in February, absolute tosh. The way you make money driving a cab in London is to get people where they want to go as quickly as possible, certainly late at night, pick up another fare and go back. This whole sort of myth, we don't go south of the river and it's slowing down for traffic lights.
Slowing down for red lights.
I can honestly say, Jeremy, hand on heart, in 30 years of driving a cab, in 30 years of mixing with cab drivers, It's just total tosh. It's never ever happened.
Done it, Steve, and most cabbies wouldn't. But this guy, I've lived in Camden 20 years, took me in the wrong direction. You know the route. Took me in a big loop round Royal College Street, for what it's worth, towards Camden Market. It's a fact. That's what happened.
Harry,
and he was wrong, heading towards heavy traffic, and he didn't apologise, and he was pulling a fast one.
No, Harry, the simple fact is I can't comment on that particular journey.
Yeah.
We don't know what went on. The guy could simply...
Harry was in the cab, so
the guy could have simply made a mistake and heading for the wrong...
Well, then in which case, say sorry. But the grumpiness when I pointed it out was staggering.
Maybe he was having a bad day like David Mellor had. But I think in the cab driver who did its defence, the piece you wrote in The Spectator was absolutely outrageous. It's hard. Us all with the same... It's hard. Well, I mean, talking about us having the preferential treatment, talking about us having... specialist advantages.
Which is true, you do have rights to pick up people which other people don't.
Which has been hard earned. I think that's very rich. Harry, that's very rich coming from somebody who belonged to the bloody Bullingdon Club.
Well, that's neither here nor there, is it?
Well,
I don't see why the fact that I did something silly at university has got anything to do with it.
You're talking about rights and privileges. I mean, you should know more about that than anyone.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Steve McNamara, General Secretary of the Licensed Taxi Drivers Association, and Harry Mount, journalist and author who, as we now know, writes for The Spectator.